Well, the U.S. Marshals have served, and we actually have the federal warrant or the served PDVSA in the United States. It's called PDV Holding. It's a Delaware corporation that owns CITGO. So they have actually been served with this $1.4 billion writ of attachment, as they call it. So they have to pay now. Now, Venezuela has, and PDVSA has immediately appealed to the Court of Appeals. But so far, the Court of Appeals has not stopped it or has not stayed the actual warrant writ of attachment.
Yeah, and it's kind of a desperate situation for Venezuela. There's a few ways out here as I read it, and please correct me again if I'm wrong, because it is extremely complicated. If they just put up this $1.4 billion that they owe this fund called Crystalex, they could keep control. But they obviously don't have any money. They have taken a loan in the past from Russia's Rosneft for $1.5 billion, which, by the way, controls about 49.9% effectively of PDV Holdings. Is there a chance in any way in the next couple of days that they could either pay the debt on their own or get help from Uncle Putin?
I don't think so. Actually, Rosneft has actually entered into the fray in the federal court in Delaware, and saying that they don't want it to be sold without their approval. And if it goes to be sold, then they immediately get to force on the underlying corporations that own CITGO a change of control clause, which makes their debt immediately due and payable, which would mean that Crystalex would have to then pay off the $1.5 billion Russian loan as well.
That is, so basically Rosneft has now become a creditor. So how likely do you think it is, Russ, that Venezuela loses CITGO? And if they do, I don't want to call it the death blow to the Maduro regime, but this is their only real source of revenue. I don't know how else to phrase it.
Well, they do rely heavily on the U.S. market, but there are other companies in the U.S. Actually, CITGO is not even the largest purchaser of Venezuelan oil in the United States, although CITGO runs around 750,000 barrels a day through its 3 main refineries. Venezuela actually sends more oil to companies like PBF in the U.S., but it is their most ready source of cash by sending it to the U.S. They can survive without it. And indeed, they were trying to sell CITGO and get rid of it because they knew all of these expropriation judgments for all the bad things they did under Chavez about stealing international oil companies' assets was going to come home to roost. And now, indeed, it is coming home to roost.
Well, as I understand it, CITGO kicks off effectively, let's call it a dividend. They kick off a dividend to PDV Holdings, which then kicks off a dividend to PDVSA, which then kicks off a dividend to the government of Venezuela. So CITGO, while yes, Venezuela sells oil to other companies, CITGO effectively takes most of its cash flow, does it not, and directly puts it in the pocket of the Maduro regime.
It did until this year. The U.S. government actually prohibited CITGO from upstreaming any more dividends to the shareholder Venezuela. So they're not allowed to do that anymore, but they have done it. One of the purposes of the lawsuit is that they were saying that it was a fraudulent transfer because CITGO couldn't sell it, so they actually put a $2.8 billion in debt on CITGO in an attempt to suck out as much money and mortgage it to the hilt, in the equivalent of putting 3 mortgages on your house before you go broke.
Here's a question you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Russ, which is that CITGO is valued at somewhere between $8 and $10 billion. Three refineries, 39 oil terminals, some retail network. Crystalex is owed $1.4 billion, 1.2 plus $200 million in penalties, or interest rather. So if they sell CITGO, Crystalex either gets paid or takes control of some asset worth $1.4 billion. What happens to the other 6 to 6.5 to 8.6 billion? Does that go to Venezuela?
It would, theoretically. However, they have loaded it up on the at the CITGO Petroleum Corporation level. They've loaded it up with about $4.2 billion in debt. On top of that, at the CITGO Holdings level, at the holding corp level, they have another $1.5 billion that they owe to Rosneft, and another $2.5 billion that PDVSA used to guarantee.
So it's already gone.
It's actually,
it's already gone.
It's mortgaged up to the hilt, exactly.